The nature of delivering applications these days has changed dramatically from the days that we would ship CD-ROM drives and put them in boxes. And although I miss those days of having a physical box, it has changed dramatically. And part of that change is the fact that we're no longer basing the support of our application based on versions. And a lot of times in the days where we had monolithic applications that customers installed, the uptime of that application was highly reliant on them. So now we are in a whole new world, and that world is services. Dave, what does building and delivering a service mean to you?
This is sort of the heart of where the world is these days. As you pointed out, not that long ago, there were still boxes. It wasn't that long ago. If you wanted to get Photoshop, you got a CD, or heaven forbid, if you go back far enough and can remember the old floppy disk drives, and you'd get a big application, and there'd be a stack of disk drives that would come out. So I always remember there was a operating system, forgotten which one, but it came out on tape and it came out on floppy drives, and it was 200 floppy drives. So the interesting thing about that happens is that you were pretty much guaranteed that 1 out of 10 of those floppies would be bad. And so you would have to redo those things, and that became a challenge. Service means just giving me something that works. That's all it really comes down and means.
Yeah, when I think of floppy drives, all I can think of is Oregon Trail for some reason. But I am fond of when I used to like HyperCard. And it wasn't 200, but I was shocked. HyperCard was like 20 discs. It was crazy. What you said is absolutely, correct. Like our customers expect the service to work and always to work. They're not thinking about the individual functionality. They're not thinking about where it's installed anymore. They're thinking about what they consume from it. And so, as we talk about microservices, we really have to get into this mindset. And site reliability engineering, in my mind, should be service reliability engineering, where it's all about the customer. The other thing that this means is that, and Dave, you have a great statistics for this. It's not just about downtime. It's not just about being down. The user can be unsatisfied just by a click taking too long.
Yeah, it's a study from Google. The first time I saw it, it was done in 2017, and then they refreshed it in 2020. And it's really interesting that what they show is 3.7 seconds is long enough for a person to bounce off of a web page. So it means 3.7 seconds is an abandoned shopping cart. 3.7 seconds is a person that is unhappy with you. When you get up to 5 seconds, that's a person who will go complain on social media. And when you get up to 10 seconds, that's a person who will never come back to your site. So down is no longer down. Slow is now the new down, something I've heard you say, Chris, quite often. And at the same point in time, one of the things you just said is spot on. People aren't buying products anymore. People are buying an end result. It's not what can you do what can I do with you. It's what can you do for me. And that's really a big change. When we move into microservices, multiply that by scale, so 10, 100,000 microservices, and each microservice is what can you deliver for me. And that gets us into some interesting considerations of how we actually make that work.
And as a matter of fact, just before we got on this recording, I was doing some back and forth with iRobot on my Roomba, which is currently having issues, but out of warranty. And even out of warranty, they were very responsive, told me what I need to do to get it up and running again, and it was fantastic. And that left me with a good impression. Well, the users of your application, it's exactly the same. It's no different. There's no reason to think that because it's technology, you are delivering anything different than any other service. Room cleaning, house cleaning, landscaping, it's the same thing. it also means, and one of the misnomers I think when people think of the service is just because somebody's not buying something from you from your application doesn't mean it's not the same considerations, because we want to leave with a good impression. And maybe your customers are 100% internal. Like Dave said, in microservices environments, your only customer might be other developers in the engineering organization. They also need to be treated like end users and customers. And that it gets us to the next big thing is, okay, we know we're delivering a service. We know we're measuring more than just up and down. What are we using to measure it? And that really comes in to metrics. And we use this term metrics all the time. And I think a lot of us kind of just generally understand what it means. But Dave, what are metrics?
Numbers, that's all they are, just a bunch of numbers, but numbers that provide measurements. Chris, you and I both work sort of in the observability space a lot. Observability is a data problem, but the data really starts with what the numbers are telling us, because we can aggregate them, we can analyze them, we can visualize them easier. It's a lot easier to add a bunch of numbers up and get a 95 percentile mark than it is to do the same thing by trying to read the same set of log data that comes in play. They're fast, they're small, and because there are so many numbers in the world, I guess, you can tailor them to what you want. And that's really a nice feature here. But honestly, we're just looking for what the systems, the services are telling us is going on. And that's really what these metrics are driving. Metrics are our view into this window. Yeah, it's been really fascinating. And I'd like to get your take on this, Chris. We talk a lot about logs, metrics, traces, but where does the world really start when we look at this picture? So I'm a former developer. I love logs, but I'm changing.
Yeah. Well, and you can't in distributed systems, you just can't start with the log. Or you could, but you're likely in the wrong spot. Yeah. So the interesting thing that I like about metrics, or the idea of metrics, and what is sometimes challenging, is it's something that we take for granted. At some point in time, you decided what to measure. You may have not realized that you did or did not put much thought into it, how that data element over a time series is going to be leveraged. What are you going to leverage it for? And I think once we start talking about service level agreements, service level objectives, and service level indicators, we are talking about the utility, basically, of those metrics, how we are going to use those metrics. And that starts with what we're already familiar with the service level agreement, which was a kind of a radical change in the kind of quality or warranty of sorts that the web SaaS service that you buy is measured against. And I think, Dave, that the SLA is mostly kind of a contract type thing, right?
I would agree with that. You can almost think of it as a legally binding agreement, even if it's not necessarily legal. But I'm going to deliver. I'm going to agree to deliver something. Sometimes I wish internet providers had more SLAs. Working at home like I am occasionally, I really wish I could guarantee a service level for my internet for this. Uh, these are three acronyms that you just mentioned: the SLO, SLI, SLA. That people can get confused here, but this agreement is just simply a statement that says this is the minimal functionality I'm going to give you, not necessarily the optimal functionality. I think I've shared with you this thing about pumping gas into my car. When I go and pump gas, it's a service. I am not doing anything with the gas except moving it from one place to another. From that, it's not something I'm going to go drill the oil out and refine it and do all those things here. But I'd be really, really irked if they didn't deliver the amount of gas that they say that they're delivering. Now, I, as a consumer, If they deliver me more gas than they're telling me, no problem. I am more than good with that. But now we get into the opposite side of this. They have an agreement that goes to their environment, which basically is a business level versus a technical level of agreement here, which says they are not going to lose money on this deal, even though they're going to guarantee that they're going to deliver something to me. And so I love this concept because most of us, even with the advent of electric cars, still end up pumping gas at some point in time in our lives. And think about how unhappy you would be if their service level agreement was breached at some point in time. Fortunately, we have, good metrics that actually test against that at the gas pump. And so they actually have people that go out and say, you pumped a gallon? Hey, look, it's exactly a gallon.
I think that it's great when we can correlate what happens in the tech world with what we've done our whole lives, because it really brings things down to reality. A lot of times we like to think we're really lofty up here in the technical. Oh, wow. I didn't realize where that analogy was going. Clouds. Really, the idea of warranty, quality of service is always been there, right? You can call somebody out by poor quality of service. If it's bad enough, you'll complain. And it's the same thing with SaaS services. The SLAs are generally published as a part of the SaaS service, and in many places a requirement. You have to publish. But as Dave said, this is the minimum requirement, right? It's not necessarily the only nor the maximum that you want to offer your customers. And given what I said earlier, is your customers are not just the end users of your application, they're the individual service owners in your organization as well. So this idea of service quality expands, and it expands into what we call service level objectives and service level indicators. And just kind of from the simplest perspective, the objective is what you want to provide. This is the quality of service I would like to make sure that I always provide to you. And the indicator is how you're going to measure it. So the service level indicator of a service level agreement is usually, is it up or is it down? Downtime. With objectives, it's much more about the customer, and it can include latency and amount of data. It can include a lot of elements that could be specific to the service itself. Is that correct, Dave?
Pretty accurate. And keeping in mind that we quite often measure service level agreements as uptime, 95% uptime, 99% uptime. Basically, when we look at that, for every 1 percentage point we add, every time we make a step at that level, it costs you about 10 times to actually guarantee that delivery. And so, all of a sudden going from 95 to 99 becomes really, really pricey at an SLA level. But if you want to make sure that your SLAs are being met, your agreements, your SLOs must be higher than your SLAs. And so
that's a really important, great point. Yeah.
And so that becomes interesting. There's another thing that needs to be considered when you're looking at SLOs and SLIs in particular, is that we're measuring objectives, but we need to make sure that our indicators are not crossing the streams, to use the proverbial Ghostbusters analogy here. Is you need to make sure that your indicators are truly measuring your objectives. Quote along the lines of, I want to guarantee that your latency will always be lower than 99 percentile for that. That doesn't work, because if it's always lower than 99 percentile, you don't have a baseline that says what it's going to be if it's above that. And so you actually end up with a shrinking metric. The second piece that I want to bring out, and I'd love to get your take on this as well, Chris, is that numbers can lie to you. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. I do have a degree in statistics. I do know how to lie for a living here. And therefore, it's possible that what you see in your data is not actually what is represented in the real world. And we see this a lot in histograms for SLOs. And your histogram is breaking these things into blocks and showing me a block. And say that block is 1 minute and is showing me that nothing ever went above 95%. Well, all it's doing is taking and averaging that block. Averaging across percentiles doesn't work. But you see histograms used for SLO indications all the time. So those things, the aggregation activity means that you are no longer getting accurate results. Accuracy and precision are really important when you're looking at your SLIs. And if you don't have all the data, you will never be able to have an accurate SLI indicating your SLO.
The GDI is a lovely term we use, getting data in, and component of this to also make sure you're comparing apples to apples when it comes to your data. Because again, each service is different. They have different stacks, different telemetry, and is again one of those things that a lot of organizations take for granted and just expect the dashboard, and maybe sometimes it's too easy to build these dashboards, but the dashboard to like just have 100% faith in the data that is behind it, when they are responsible for getting the right data and correlating the data and measuring the data on their own. I like what you said about the two things: the fact that your service level objectives need to be more stringent than your SLA. Otherwise, it's just your SLA. And the indicators actually have to map to that. Again, another thing that is taken for granted is like, why have an objective that you're not even measuring correctly, or you're measuring something something else? And so there is a strategic element to this, and that's the next point that I wanted to get into. Is how do organizations, what are some of the things that can go wrong in strategy? And these are just some of the things that I've seen, Dave, and you've probably seen others. But also one thing that our SRE team inside of Splunk is really good at, so starting with stewardship, because developers are not thinking about service level objectives and indicators, as much as we'd like them to, but they're worried about building functionality. The cool thing about microservices is a microservice is a thing. You put something into it, it does something, and it outputs something. So your promise to the developers consuming that service is that it will receive these things and it will receive them well, and it will output these things and it will output them well. So there is some element of what is sometimes referred to as your contract that you can just take from those elements and understand what you're measuring. So by having good stewardship built into your DevOps engineering and your SRE practice, you can help your developers understand what their indicators and their objectives should be. Because I've been in organizations where the engineers really just do not even know where to start, and they expect somebody else to tell them. The other thing is consistency. Once you have decided, the entire engineering team should have some level of consistency on how they use these metrics, how they display them, and how they come up with them. And then again, it should all be working backward from your customer. It should not just be up or down. You should take into account what is the customer experience. So let's say you have this stewardship, you know how to be consistent, but you really don't understand what the right metrics are. We get asked this all the time. Can you just tell me what the metrics should be? And yeah, there are standard metrics out there, read, use, etc. But there's usually going to be unique metrics at the service level. And one of the cool things that I've recently discovered, Dave, is the using of application testing to help determine your metrics. So you can test your application. You can leverage something like synthetics or your functional testing, your unit testing, and look at the areas that have been problem spaces for you from a performance perspective and mark those, because they could potentially be the same areas that your users are facing dissatisfaction, especially in the area of synthetics and real user monitoring, which is exactly at the point of the end user. You can maybe work back from the testing there to start to build your service level indicators and thus identify the metrics you need to have. I think that the strategy component of it is the thing that a lot of organizations overlook. What other strategies should organizations think about?
I love this. You're so spot on. The testing aspect is something people tend to forget about. If you don't have a baseline to which to compare yourself, you basically are taking a dartboard and throwing darts to set your SLO and retrospect your SLAs. You have to know what you're capable of before you can successfully do that. There are two things that I also see a lot. One is use of vanity as an SLO. And because of this, and you said this earlier, it might be too easy to build these things. It might be too easy to track all this stuff coming in here. But a group doesn't have to know every single detail that makes it up. The mention of red is one of those. Rate error duration. There's a reason it's really popular. It's a very simple, clean, and well understood way of measuring a performance metric. So rate error duration together make up a really reasonable. It brings me to the second point, is that you have to be sure that what you are measuring is impactful to the business objective. We have a lot of technical SLOs. We have a lot of technical SLAs here. But if they don't impact the business, why do we care for this? And they can give you false readings. And I'm going to pick on red. I love red, as people who have seen us before know I can get into red forever here. But red has errors. You want to have an error strategy, but you can't ever say you're going to have 0 errors. That doesn't work. So give yourself an error budget. Your budget is in fact your SLOs, very honestly. You have a latency aspect, the duration, and you want to make sure that your customers aren't waiting too long. Remember that 3.7 seconds inside of here. And then you have a rate of requests that are coming in here. But you can't set a business SLO on request rates. You cannot do so because you are not responsible for driving the request rate going into your system. You can only set it so that you can guarantee that a request rate will never be exceeded, but you can't test for it. You don't know where it is. You can set against duration. You can set against errors. But if the company suddenly says, I'm not going to sell something today, and the request rate drops to 0, and you've set an SLA against the request rate, you're in deep trouble. Or DNS melts down on the East Coast, you're in trouble, and it's not your responsibility. So keep in mind technical versus business, and make sure that you can actually safely measure whatever you're measuring. And I see this mistake all the time, particularly with the new modern monitoring practices, all the time.
That's really interesting. There's some things easy to measure doesn't mean it is the right thing. Also, error budgets. That is a huge topic that I don't know that anybody really likes to think about. But if you find that person, maybe David, you like to think about error budgets, but a huge, very interesting topic. And I think the key point is there is a huge strategy element to this. And the strategy is gonna guide your tool adoption. So if you want to be successful with your tools, you need to have a strategy. And the DevOps organization and the SRE practice can be really good at establishing these. We do an amazing job with our SaaS platform, and so it's something to always think about. A front end service is going to behave and be measured, slightly different at the service level than, not even slightly different than, a back end service. And so these are all top considerations for your organization. Well, as always, Dave, learn a lot. even though I'm not supposed to be learning from you. Our audience is supposed to be learning from us, but but I always learn angles to this that I think are critical. Make sure you check out our other episode recently on the hues of DevOps, because we cover red there. Dave covers that in depth, and we also have another episode on metrics, logs, and traces that relate to this for the metrics that you're going to get in to measure all of this. So thank you for joining us.